New Year's Eve is not a neutral, non-religious celebration. New Year's Eve is connected to 4th century Christianity in Rome and is something that Jews should think about before they celebrate. So in the Jerusalem Post here, we see an article, New Year's Eve, should Jews party like the rest of the world? Israel is ironically among the few countries that name the occasion after known anti-Semite Pope Sylvester. So in Israel, New Year's Eve is not celebrated as New Year's Eve. Almost every Israeli calls it Sylvester. And what's ironic about this is that Pope Sylvester was one of the most anti-Semitic popes in history. If we take a look down here, we see that generally in Israel this day is called Sylvester. Now, New Year's Day, it's not a public holiday in Israel. New Year's Day and New Year's Eve, they're not holidays. People work on these days. Anybody who celebrates on New Year's Eve is required to show up to work the next day at 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, who was Sylvester? Sylvester was a 4th century pope of the Catholic Church and a saint. He died on December 31st. And so many European countries adopted this day to call it the day of the Feast of the Pope, about the day of the Feast of Pope Sylvester. Now, a lot of Ashkenazic Jews, when they came to Israel, they carried with them this name of Sylvester, because in Germany and Poland, Jews had called this day Sylvester. They didn't call it New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. This article goes on to discuss the idea that it's better for Israelis to refer to it by its name that everybody else calls it, New Year's Eve, in order not to speak too much about a pope who did a lot of not so good things for Jews in the past. Another article by the Israeli news channel Arutz Sheva, or Channel 7, says Israelis who blithely call the eve of January 1st Sylvester and Jews who celebrate New Year's Eve as the civil year is ushered in may not be aware of its tragic significance in Jewish history. So this author, Rochel, her father used to be a religious Jew, and she remembers growing up in New York in a very Jewish neighborhood that, as she says, Sylvester Nacht, was something like the night Niagara Falls froze over, and the resultant eerie silence awakened people for miles around. Our house was silent on that night, and not because of the carol by that name. Usually her dad woke up at 4 a.m. every day. He had his coffee, prayed, and studied Torah. However, if we come down here, it says that he did not study Torah on Sylvester night. He didn't allow us to study Torah either. He explained this was a silent night, made so by the Eastern European Jews who lived in fear of the yearly pogroms that accompanied the ushering in of what is the civil New Year today. A pogrom, for those of you who don't know, is it was a usually random assembling of non-Jews who lived around these shtetls, these villages of Jews. And when they felt like it, they would assemble perhaps dozens of men to go in and do anything from robbing the Jewish inhabitants to physical, brutal violence, setting their houses on fire, and then they would leave. And lots of times, this often happened in countries like Russia, where in remote areas, and sometimes the police and the Russian army weren't around to do anything, or they didn't do anything, and they were pretty awful times. So The article goes on to say that, as opposed to random pogroms and other manifestations of Jew hatred, this was a predictable yearly date. This was one of the few days, along with Easter, that they knew that there would be a very strong possibility that their village would be raided by drunk, anti-Semitic non-Jews who were coming to hurt the Jews in any possible way they could sometimes. Again, if we go back up here, once the calendar settled on December 25th as Christmas, then they added 8 days to this day, December 25th, counting December 25th as one day, and you arrive at January 1st. And January 1st is 8 days after January 25th, if you count January 25th as one day. And so this would be the night, the 31st would be the night preceding the circumcision of the child born in the little town of Bethlehem. And so this would be an excuse for these non-Jews to engage in drinking, making merry, and killing Jews. So according to this calendar, the day of the circumcision was January 1st. So the reason why they didn't study Torah on December 31st is because using candles, then there was light, and these people were just in their huts, barricaded behind the flimsy doors of their huts, and they didn't want people to know that they were home, to try and decrease the chance of someone breaking into their house in an attempt to come and harm them. So eventually, Torah study was forbidden. And this also happened concerning Easter in Jerusalem. So again, this is in the 1800s and before. Someone who lived in the old city of Jerusalem before the state of Israel was declared told me that on Easter Sunday the same thing would happen, that the Jews would barricade their doors, knowing that the traditional Christian procession would often end in rioting against the local Jews. So the author writes, it's really surprising to hear Israeli Jews use the term Sylvester and in the media for a day that was such a challenging day for Jews in history. A little bit about Sylvester. Pope Sylvester, he's thought to have been instrumental in the process that led to the Emperor Constantine's conversion to Christianity. And so in the 1996 issue of News and World Report that was published on December 23rd, 1996, the writer wrote, on New Year's Day, 1577, Pope Gregory decreed that all Roman Jews, under pain of death, must listen attentively to the compulsory Catholic conversion sermon given in Roman synagogues after Friday night services. On New Year's Day, 1578, Gregory signed into a law a tax forcing Jews to pay for the support of a house of conversion to convert Jews to Christianity. On New Year's 1581, Gregory ordered his troops to confiscate all sacred literature from the Roman Jewish community. Thousands of Jews were murdered in the campaign. Throughout the medieval and post-medieval periods, January 1, supposedly the day on which Jesus' circumcision initiated the reign of Christianity and the death of Judaism, was reserved for anti-Jewish activities, synagogue and book burnings, public tortures, and simple murder. The article from 1996 U.S. News and World Report, December 23rd, went on to say the Israeli term for New Year's night celebrations, Sylvester, was the name of the saint and Roman Pope who reigned during the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE. The year before, he was said to have convinced Constantine to prohibit Jews from living in Jerusalem. At the Council of Nicaea, Sylvester arranged for the passage of a host of viciously anti-Semitic legislation. All Catholic saints are awarded a day on which Christians celebrate and pay tribute to that saint's memory. December 31 is the day for Saint Sylvester. And then there's more articles. Here's a little more information about what's called Nittel Nacht. It was also a day. And so Nittel Nacht referred to beginning on Christmas Eve. In the Middle Ages in Christendom, Jews were often forbidden from appearing in public during the Christmas holidays, and Christmas Eve frequently marked the beginning of attacks on the Jewish population. So this was also happening on Christmas Eve. And so we find more information on other websites about this issue. So it seems that December 31st was a very feared day among Jews in Europe, and whether or not Jews should celebrate it today is, of course, a personal decision, but it's definitely not a Jewish event or a Jewish celebration.